Hi, this is A. Rubin with Comic Book School, and I'm here with Victoria Grace Elliott, the creator of Yummy, the history of desserts from Random House Graphic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you, Ari?
I am okay. I'm doing great. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the book, just to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Yummy, A History of Desserts is basically a history of eight different desserts guided by three food sprites who love food most of all. They each sort of have different specialties that they do. So, the main sprite, Perry, is the one who is the main narrator of the book, and she loves dessert. She loves figuring out about them, and she loves the legends that come with all of the desserts. And then you have the other two. So there's science, and then there's also historical interviews with historical figures. But that's sort of the gist of the book.
Well, that's really cool. And you're writing a nonfiction book, a history book, but as a graphic novel. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose to do it as a graphic novel, and what do you think the graphic novel adds to a nonfiction or an educational type book?
Oh, yeah. So I've always loved comics. So for me, it was sort of just like, well, what kind of comic am I going to do? And it ended up being dessert history more than the reverse. And part of that was, I mean, even doing the research for this book, I noticed one of the most frustrating things for me, since I'm a really visual and hands on learner, was while I was reading all of these great nonfiction books, there was very, very, very little visual information. It was like one of my favorite books that I used was by Elizabeth David, and she only in the center of that book about it was the history of ice cream had like some historical prints and references. And I remember that being like really frustrating. I used those like a lot, but it was still like I wished all the other books I had been reading had that because, you're dealing with history, you're dealing with historical food, and it doesn't look the same as it does now. So you want to evoke that. And I think in a graphic novel, you're able to like seamlessly merge both the visual and the textual information.
And can you give an example from the book of something that illustrates that?
Like from Yummy
Yeah,
itself.
from Yummy itself, like an example where you feel like the visual really enhances it or
Oh
allows you to
yeah.
understand it in a different way.
Well, one really early on, part of what I did to sell the book was I was doing just like a few of the early pages for the ice cream chapter. And I early on have this illustration of the Yakchal, the Persian ice house, where I like was able to visually show like this is how the cold air would come in and keep the ice at the bottom of this ice house cold and how the hot air would be expelled. And I feel like that's a good example of something that would like be a diagram in another book, and it functionally is in this as well, but you kind of get like it's easier to transition to like a graph and then to also transition to like, well, this is what the ice treats at that time actually looked like, this is the kind of bowl they might have been served in, that kind of thing.
Well, that's cool. And it's aimed at children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does a graphic novel, specifically for something like a historical subject, how does that, what are the advantages of using that format for children?
I think, I mean, I love drawing cute things. So having the sprites, I think, is selling that to children made it a lot easier for me, just in terms of how I would want to draw the book. I think if I was drawing this for adults, it would be very different and it would have like a different bent. But I really love using these bright colors, and I really love the kind of, silly tongue in cheek humor that I could do with these kinds of characters.
Right. Do you think that the format, the graphic novel format, allows you to convey information as an educator differently than you would if it was a prose book, or someone would if they were writing a regular prose book?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think for me again, this is the kind of way I would have learned best. I read a lot of food comics and, a good amount of ones that actually show how people make food, and I have already learned so much from those. So I feel like Yummy sort of does that in a different degree, just like talking about historical food and what it looked like and where it's from and that kind of thing in the same way.
That's interesting. I also wanted to ask you about your we do the craft side of a comic book school. We do the craft and business of making comics for creators, and I feel like the business side isn't always covered as much. You're publishing this with Random House, which is a traditional big five book publisher and your publishing house as opposed to a comics publisher. I feel like a lot of our audience may not think of selling a book to a publisher like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and about the process of how you were able to get that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was lucky in so many ways because I'd been doing webcomics before then. And I think a lot of folks in webcomics have sort of made the transition to specifically like YA and middle grade graphic novels. I think it was just the sort of the space that was the most open to us, but also a lot of people who are in those spaces, I think, have paid attention to what webcomic artists like, 5 to 10 years ago were doing. So Gina Gagliano, who started up RHG, actually reached out to me to pitch. And I know she reached out to a lot of people I know who had exhibited at conventions and things like that. So I did sort of have to tweak it actively. Like, I think a lot of us, we may have more naturally written something for an older audience, coming from the webcomic sphere. But I think a lot of us have sort of adapted to like, okay, well, we need to sell this to middle grade. Like, it definitely does affect kind of what you're able to write, because it depends on what they're able to buy, right? And what they can tell the higher ups at Random House, like, okay, can we buy this, and that kind of thing. So we had to adapt sort of the genre and stuff like that.
That's cool. So they came to you, they approached you.
Yeah, she approached me to pitch. I didn't have a project at that time. Fortunately, my agent Steven Salpeter is friendly with Gina, so they went, I believe, to an ice cream parlor actually, and sort of like picked her brain about what she wanted, what she saw for the imprint. And it was in that meeting that she referenced wanting a food history book and referenced ice cream. And so I sort of took that and ran with it. So that's part of why I say I'm really lucky. It was like just happenstance. If Steven hadn't known her, this wouldn't have happened.
Oh, that's cool. But so you have an agent. Can you talk a little bit about the process of how a comics creator might go about getting an agent?
Yeah, you can. So there are a lot of agents, more and more, they're open to people who have graphic novel, either, projects in the works, or they're interested in picking up people who do graphic novels. And it'll say on their websites, again, this is another lucky thing. One of my friends, Gabriella Epstein, she was already agented with Steven. And so it was through her. I needed, once Gina reached out to me, I was also like, I need an agent. So I luckily enough reached out to him, and he did have availability. So it worked like that. But I was also trying to reach out to a lot of agents, and it's really difficult. So it's hard to find people, and you have to have a project in so many cases when you're going to agents blindly. But I think if you're active on social media, if you're reaching out to people and seeing what they're interested in, because I think a lot of agents have uh, the wish lists of projects that they're looking for. And I think that's a really good guide for like, oh, okay, would I get along with this agent, and would my stuff be up their alley?
Well, so they actually approached you before you had the agent then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's cool. So can you get, and you said that's based off of your webcomic and on exhibiting at conventions and things like that.
Yeah, Gina had seen me. I remember seeing her at TCAFs before. So I think she knew of me just through social media and through the webcomic I'd been doing for a while.
Cool. What advice do you have for create? I'm sure we'd all love to have agents approach us on conventions and based on our social media. What advice do you have for creators about how to position themselves on social media or in conventions to attract that kind of attention?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to specify I was the one who reached out to Steven, but it was Gina at Random House who reached out to me.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
it's yeah, just to like make sure that it's clear. But in terms of that, I'd say just the problem is social media is so nebulous, and a lot of it is luck. So I would say just post things that you're passionate about, and post, make friends with people that you think are interesting. Don't sort of like put too much stock into it, because I think there's plenty of people who, based off of the strength of their portfolio, can get incredible work. Like, it's not all about numbers, and it's not all about popularity online. But I think just being active in the community, and making friends with peers and supporting them while they do their work goes a really long way. So it's not it can sound really soulless when you call it networking or something like that, but a lot of this organic process comes from just having fun and doing what I like to do, showing off what I like to do, and making friends with like-minded people online. So I think if you look at it like that, it feels less like a homework or a chore.
Okay. And you also had mentioned conventions. What about how you present yourself at conventions?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I found it was actually easier when I, again, was just like doing what I wanted. So I'd make scenes that I was really interested in. Like early on, I would go to conventions and I tried to take portfolios to like publishers. And it was kind of, looking back, I'm kind of like, oh, that was not the way I needed to do this. I think it was a little bit easier when I was just, doing a setup that I really liked. So I was trying to emphasize the webcomic I was doing was very like rustic looking, like cottage core, I guess is what you'd call it now. So it's like my setup, I was trying to do a very like cottage core setup. I was having a lot of fun with the design and the decoration. And I'd exhibit with friends who were also like doing similar stuff. Like Jesse Zabarski was who I exhibited with, I think the year that Gina approached me. And we both had like a very, fake plants at our table and everything like that. So it's like, if you are into decoration, if you are into those kinds of things, I think just putting a lot of love into the presentation that you're doing. I think, again, a like-minded creator who may end up having an imprint one day will see that and see that passion and hopefully be able to like come by and pick up your work. But I think it's hard when you shouldn't go into it thinking that'll ultimately be the goal. But I think when you have passion and you display it in so many ways, and when you have like a convention setup that you're really proud of and that you think looks good, I think that'll come through to a lot of people.
Cool. Cool. Can you give a little bit of advice to people who may want to pursue webcomics? I know it's a growing field in the industry.
Yeah, it's so there's a lot of different ways you can do web comics. I know Hiveworks is really, really good. That's who I published my web comic with for a while. They have a lot of back end support and they're much more indie. So you get editorial support to a certain degree, you get a certain amount of ad money, and you also get for me the most important part was technical support, so in terms of like how you actually build your website, because I really loved having a super customized website. If you're more interested in and that's the kind of thing where like Hiveworks may not, I think they occasionally open applications these days. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but like there's a bunch of different kinds of communities like that you can reach out to, or maybe just start doing your own and then reach out to them in time. There's also, I know Webtoon is a new field, and I think that one's a little bit trickier because that one's going to be much more geared towards trying to get numbers and trying to get views. And you can self-publish on Webtoon Canvas. And like, I think Tapas and a lot of places like that have places where you can publish your work and you might not necessarily get paid, but you don't have to worry about website hosting and you don't have to worry about like that technical side of everything. And you do already have like an aggregate community where people can see your work. Again, unfortunately, I think because it is a little bit more corporatized, it's a lot more about like the traffic that you get per comic. So they're going to want you to be a lot more rigid in terms of like when you update and stuff like that. And that'll more directly determine your success, because it sort of works a little bit more like social media where they like having regular posts at certain times and things like that. But those are some new avenues I know are opening up slowly in webcomics.
Oh, very cool. I think that that'll be very helpful to people. One thing that we ask about of all our creators is for a pro tip, the one piece of advice that you wish someone gave you when you were starting out.
Oh, that's really good. Let me think. Well, I can think of, if it works, I can think of some advice people did give me that saved my life.
Okay.
So one of those I would say, if you are in the States, there's a very particular tax law in terms of making freelance comics and things like that. Always save a third of your money. You can get up to taxed on any of the income you make. You can get taxed up to a third. And I had a roommate at the time who told me this because she found out the hard way that you get taxed a third of your freelance income. And it was really rough on her. And I always look back on that. And I'm so thankful to have heard that, because if I did not know, I would not have known to save.
Well, that's interesting. It's again, craft and business and making comics is an important thing to know.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people find you if they want to follow your work on social media or elsewhere?
So on Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Friday Afternoon.
Okay. And any websites or anything like that?
Oh, I do have a portfolio at vgeportfolio.com, but it's pretty sparse. And then if you are interested in going back to read my old webcomic, it's balder-comic.com.
Cool. Very cool. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, that's about it.
All right. So that was this A.A. Rubin with Comic Book School here with Victoria Grace Elliott, the creator of Yummy, A History of Desserts, which is available from Random House Graphic, recently come out. You should be able to get it wherever books are sold. Thank you so much. Back to you, buddy.